From the Mumbai studios of Republic TV, it's time for The Debate.
Thank you for joining us on The Debate. I'm Niranjan and I'm filling in for Arnab Goswami, who will be back on the show tomorrow. There's been another rocket attack in Kabul this morning, a classic Taliban-style attack of rocket launchers hidden in a car and aimed at the airport. America says the threat is real and the next 24 hours are crucial in Afghanistan. The deadline is coming to an end. That's debate number one. Let's look at the two big debates we have. At 9 p.m., rockets, guns, blasts, US ensuring Afghanistan becomes a cradle of terror. We'll tell you about what happened in the last 24 hours. And debate number two at 10 p.m. Pakistan officially says there could be another 9/11. They have warned the West. Deepti coming up with that big debate at 10 p.m. Here are the headlines this Monday evening. 5 rockets fired by the ISIS near Kabul airport, intercepted by air defense systems. With the Taliban ruling Afghanistan, Osama bin Laden's aide has made a comeback. Taliban terrorists brandish guns in TV studios of Afghanistan. It's all recorded live. It's happening. It's beaming live across Afghanistan. Pakistan officially turns Taliban. Spokesperson warns the West of another 9/11 if they don't engage with the new regime. Investigation panel summons Parambir Singh in connection with the extortion racket. Sources say he's gone missing. They can't find him. India's medal haul at Paralympics with 2 golds, 2 silvers, 1 bronze in a single day, taking the total tally to 7, one of the best campaigns. Ladies and gentlemen, this evening we have 7 videos that show the rule of terror in Afghanistan. From rocket launchers this morning on the streets of Kabul, and Republic TV was reporting live from the site of the attack, to gun-wielding terrorists on television, inside studios, during live telecasts. America has plunged Afghanistan into the worst ever crisis, turning the country into a cradle of terror. Even Osama bin Laden's aide is back in Afghanistan once the Taliban has taken over. Here's what has happened in the last 24 hours, and then we have a debate.
At 6:15 p.m. Afghanistan time, this building 3 kilometers from Kabul airport was impacted by a rocket attack. A few kilometers away, people gathered around a sedan that was set ablaze. 5 rockets were allegedly fired from this car, and the air defense system intercepted the rockets in time.
Hi everyone, you are watching Republic World TV from Afghanistan. Here is the place that the rocket has been hit to Kabul airport. Fortunately, it defended by Kabul airport radar system.
A closer look at the car shows 6 homemade rocket tubes mounted in place of back seats that were used to launch the rockets by ISIS. And a similar system was used by the Taliban to target Bagram Air Base in 2020.
And that's the vehicle. Watch this vehicle very, very closely. You will see canisters of the rockets in this car that was destroyed. At least 6 Katyusha rockets, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the 6th one here. And that's what remains of the car. Let's tell you the other details. Reports suggest that rockets were fired from this vehicle in the Khair Khana area in Kabul. And what we also know is that the US has confirmed that the rockets were fired towards the Kabul International Airport, and missile defense systems thwarted this attack, so it did not reach the airport.
These pictures are not just the only proof of old terror in new packaging. Almost 200 kilometers from Kabul, in Nangarhar, Osama's close aide has returned to his native place. He finds a sanctuary in the new Taliban rule. And in TV studios, gunmen behind the TV presenter are making their debut, reflecting the rule of terror.
فراری و مردم تنها گذاشت و ویژه برنامه پرداز باز هم شما را خوش آمدید میگویم.
They are changing the education system.
من بعد هغه نقصانات او تدارک کو چې هغه د اسلام سره په تصادم کې وي. لکه افغانان مسلمانان یو د اسلام نه تیرېدې نشي. درې څلوېښت کاله د اسلام دپاره قرباني دا ورکړې ده. په تحصیلي چاپېریال کې په هر ځای کې چې داسې یو حالت موجود وي چې هغه د اسلام سره په تصادم کې وي د هغې ځاله به کېدی شي.
Women's rights have been snatched and forced to flee their homeland.
We don't want our next generation to go through what we went through. But history totally repeated itself. And after 20 years of efforts and hard work in Afghanistan, I just packed everything up in one small bag of 4 to 5 kg and left my country behind, which was very much heartbreaking for me because I wanted to stay and I wanted to be with my people. I wanted to help them. But I did not have any other choice.
The Taliban rule of terror is for the world to see. Will those who sang praises of the so-called new Taliban now take back their words? Let's debate.
Joining us on the debate this evening are Smita Prakash, editor, news agency ANI. Joining us live from the national capital, Colonel Rohit Dev, geopolitical and defense analyst. Dr. Lawrence Sellin, who's a retired US Army colonel and Afghan war veteran, joining us live from Montana this evening. Dr. Patrick Cronin, who's the chair for Asia Pacific Security at the Hudson Institute, joining us live from Washington, D.C. Ray Locker, also from Washington, D.C. He's an author and presidential historian. Underscore, publisher, Journal of Political Risk, live from London this evening. And Ravi Batra will be joining us live at 9:20. Let me start with Dr. Lawrence Sellin, who's a retired US Army colonel and a war veteran who served in Afghanistan. I want to start with the pictures, Dr. Lawrence Sellin, of a key Al-Qaeda commander who has returned to what is now a safe haven, once again for the Al-Qaeda. Aminul Haq, we had his pictures come in, someone who served as the key security man for Osama bin Laden when he was operating in Tora Bora. He's back in Afghanistan, and when you look at those pictures, I'll play those videos. That's the video of him returning in a convoy, Dr. Lawrence Sellin. And I want to ask you, you've served in Afghanistan. Who but America has plunged Afghanistan into this reign of terror when today you see these visuals of how Osama's aide, a top Al-Qaeda commander, who America has spent nearly 2 decades fighting, back in Nangarhar with a cavalcade, getting a red carpet welcome. Dr. Sellin.
Well, why is Al-Qaeda back in Afghanistan? Al-Qaeda for the last 20 years has been operating out of Pakistan. The Taliban itself was created by Pakistan and supported by Pakistan and given sanctuary by Pakistan. The Islamic State of Khorasan originated from Pakistanis. 9 of the 12 original Shura members were Pakistanis. So people need to understand that the epicenter of terrorism and radical Islam in South Asia is Pakistan. And we've been fighting the wrong war in Afghanistan for 20 years. We're fighting it as an insurgency when it's actually a proxy war that had been waged by Pakistan against Afghanistan and the United States and NATO and its allies by using the Taliban.
Now, it's interesting that you say that, Dr. Lawrence Sellin. After 2 decades, you say that you've been fighting the wrong war. But that's not what other Americans are saying. I want to bring in Ray Locker. Ray Locker, I saw you nodding your head when Dr. Lawrence Sellin was speaking. Will America really bring Pakistan to account? Or will Pakistan become another base for America now?
Well, I mean, we've been trying to deal with Pakistan vis-a-vis Afghanistan for more than 40 years with intermittent mixed success. And so I think the results show that we probably will not be able to bring Pakistan to account because we haven't been able to do so, in the last 40 years. It's been a chain reaction of disappointment for a long time.
Yeah. And the second, defining image that I wanted to bring in before I bring in our other panelists is Smita Prakash. I want you to come in on this one of Taliban terrorists, waving American M16s in a television studio. Never seen something like that before. When a television news presenter was speaking about and trying to convince people about why the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan or the Taliban rule should be accepted. I'll play those visuals, and I want to bring you in, Smita, on what you thought when you looked at those visuals this evening.
I think all of us were horrified looking at those pictures. I mean, we heard about, or we saw it, the attack on that Tolo TV reporter, the killing of Danish Siddiqui, and now these armed terrorists actually behind a TV anchor. I mean, I don't see this ever having happened before in the world. I mean, none of this gives any credence to Taliban's statement on media freedom. They promise media freedom. Anyway, who in his right mind would believe any assurances given by gun-wielding militants, that too from the Taliban, knowing their history? Apart from, of course, the most powerful country in the world, which bought its assurances. It's a very wrong reading that Taliban doesn't have sophisticated communicators, that they're just gun-wielding, terrorists. They are much more than that. I mean, on the one hand, their messaging is via sermons in mosques, leaflets and word of mouth, but on the other hand, they have successfully cultivated the American media. They have rebranded themselves. They did, I mean, not now, but they did rebrand themselves so as to lull the Americans into a de-escalation and a withdrawal, and that too a clumsy withdrawal, because the Americans believed, the American media bought that Kool-Aid, that this is a rebranded Taliban, this is something which is different. But what have they done? They are going to be going back to the same culture of beheadings, enforcing medieval laws. I mean, if you, Niranjan, since you asked me on the subject of media, the Taliban's propaganda machinery has been fabulous. If you actually see, their social media is run by Pakistan, just like you talked about. I mean, the expert before me spoke about how their military was run by Pakistan. Their entire being actually cultivated, motivated, run by them, created by them. It's managed, and in the social media handles are located in Pakistan, and nobody has been able to crack down on that. The statements, and today, as you rightfully pointed out, that the Pakistan National Security Advisor is actually invoking 9/11. And this is what Pakistan will do. They'll become rent seekers all over again. They created instability via the Haqqani network earlier. They are creating that instability all over again. Haqqani network right there in the driver's seat with the Taliban. It's a repeat cycle all over again.
Yeah. As far as the Taliban is concerned, I think today's rocket attacks were a reality check. And I want to show you a picture, and I'll get in Anders' score on this one, and Colonel Rohit Dev can come in. Anders, it almost seems like you're allowing terror under Taliban rule, and three defining images from today. One that Smita just spoke about, Taliban terrorists wielding guns in a studio, and you had an Al-Qaeda commander returning to Afghanistan because it's a safe haven once again for him, because the Taliban is back. And that picture, we were reporting live from the ground. Our reporter was there with, in the car where those rocket launchers, I think those were Katyusha rocket launchers that were used, inside a car in the back seat. Exactly what happened in 2020, exactly what was used by the Taliban to target the Bagram airbase in 2020. Exactly the similar model, the same modus operandi. They're claiming that the ISIS, Khorasan or whatever carried out this attack, but this is exactly what Taliban had done to attack American troops last year at the Bagram airbase, and there are pictures of that as well, right? And when you look at these pictures, right, you look at these pictures, how can the US look away Anders, how can the US look away from the chaos when there are cars with rocket launchers in the back seat near the Kabul airport firing, rocket after rocket being fired to cause large-scale devastation, right? You can't really look away. The Taliban did this last year. Yeah.
That this is clearly terrorism. The Taliban is still a terrorist organization. Al-Qaeda and ISIS-K are still terrorist organizations, and now they're apparently moving into Afghanistan in force. And I think we have to take the fight back to them, whether that's through tougher sanctions, possibly a new strategy in Afghanistan that's a military strategy. And we also need to increase our sanctions, economic sanctions on Pakistan and on China. China is the enabler of Pakistan. It's not just Pakistan. If you look back into the, over the years, over the past 5 years at least, China has been heavily supporting the Taliban and Pakistan, both diplomatically and probably in other ways. Definitely Pakistan has been supported financially by India. By China. So we have to take that into account, and we really have to go to the root of the problem, which I would argue is Beijing.
But I'm not sure whether the Americans are in any mood, Colonel Rohit Dev, to acknowledge the Pakistan problem. You had John Bolton, the former national security advisor, who spoke to Arnab a few days back. Last week he was on the show, and he said one of the biggest mistakes that America is making is not holding Pakistan to account. And he said that's the root cause. You've been fighting the wrong battle, as Dr. Lawrence Sellen mentioned, right? You think America's witnessing it? You think they're going to change? They're going to course correct, Colonel Rohit Dev?
See, what America does in its best interest, it will do. But let me give you a few pointers here, Niran. Firstly, what is the difference between Taliban 1.0 and 2.0 takeover? There's no difference. Both saw a surge of so-called Islamic kind of a resurgence happening in Afghanistan, with terrorists pouring in from the northern Caucasus of Russia, from Pakistan, from even China. And these physical movements have been documented, and even the ex-president and the military dictator of Pakistan, President Pervez Musharraf, has said on record. So America has all the way known it, because like the first speaker said, Taliban was created in the Cold War era to cater to the Russians who were involved in Afghanistan. And at that time, the porosity of the border allowed the American strategists and the Pakistani executioners of that philosophy to create the Taliban, and then they developed all the kind of terror networks which you see today. All are interlinked. So to say that, Taliban has today, very infamously, as a joke per se, said that, it has been a terrorist attack in Kabul. And come on, a terrorist is calling a terrorist attack. And let me tell you, the handle which the US has given to Taliban happened on 14th of April this year, when Biden announced withdrawal of US troops. And even within 24 hours, the Taliban spokesperson, through a Twitter handle, imagine their reach, through a Twitter handle, they mentioned that they will talk about the Afghan status and progress or future only after withdrawal of foreign people and soldiers from Afghanistan. And then you set the ball rolling. Pakistan was waiting for this opportunity to regain the Islamic Caliphate, kind of a taj on his head, to take the battle back to Afghanistan. Whether you talk about the economic sense, and I'm glad the previous speaker from London spoke about it, China. Now, even if the US thinks that it has tapped the 9 billion freeze right now, it has tapped about 86 handles of accounts today, China can step in. So money is not a problem. So you have to differentiate between the handles you hold in your hand and not give away the initiative to a terrorist organization. For a US president to come on global television to address as the most powerful country and the person on earth, to say we made a deal with Taliban, is something which is absolutely unpardonable. For the CIA chief to hop in the next week, to see the future of the next 7 days and 31st deadline, to try and broker only the peace to the extent to save the US life, is also seen. And believe you me, what is this, one sprinter, hitting a wall and a hole in the earth in Nangrar or any other place in Kabul to hit a vehicle through a drone today when you compare it to 150 or 100 casualties on the Kabul airport and civilians dying, and the 20 years of promise, the 20 years of prosperity, peace and democracy you promised and infused in the common Afghan, it has been bolted and given such a shock today that they will not be able to come out of it. And US has to do much more and much more. I am a friend of the US. India and US are taking a lot of things ahead together as strategic partners. And it's my advice to you. You have identified Pakistan as the epicenter of terror. Pakistan today on your television show, Republic, has said that 9/11 may again happen. Do you understand what kind of a terror leverage? It's never heard. Terror leverage. It's not a financial leverage. It's not an economic leverage. It's not a geopolitical leverage. It's a terror leverage they're talking about, that it can happen again. How vulnerable do you want to get against a lapdog? Treat it as a lapdog. Pakistan, you used it well in the times of Taliban 1.0. Today, it is not your biggest messenger on earth. You have to differentiate. US is going to be isolated in the committee by two powers. One is the world at large, which will now look at a weakened US geopolitical stature. The second is the Chinese. What did you fear? 15 years back on your white papers, you feared a resurgence of China into economic realm and military realm. Today, economically, it is leading. Militarily, it is far behind. But if you give these safe havens of Afghanistan and the access to Central Asia, Eurasia and other parts of the world to the Chinese handle, you will lose a lot of geopolitical stature. Why do you want to do it? And deal or no deal, 24 hours or plus is left, since your withdrawal time will be called out. Do you think Taliban is going to be complacent? No. They, as a matter of propaganda, struck you even last year in Kabul. They have struck you now again at the airport. And they will continue these sporadic attacks to only show to the world that they are the rulers and not the United States of America. How hard is it on the sacrifices of the veterans, Colonel Selin, which you have faced in Afghanistan? And for policy enunciations, withdrawal, such an operational blunder, how could you move our troops without moving the SIVs, the Afghans, and the foreign nationals from Afghanistan? You may announce whatever way you want to announce. So I think still you are at a point that you can make your weight count. And the weight has to count more than economic today, because even your weapon systems are getting transported through AFPAC into Pakistan today. So this 7 years and a decade of a blockade of Pakistan is really not helping. The same weapons will come onto Kashmir and other parts of Southeast Asia. Do you want that to happen?
On that point, Colonel Dave, I wanted to comment on that point where you spoke about the equipment, right? We broke these visuals from Kandahar, the first Black Hawk officially operated by the Taliban. I mean, it's such an irony. I want to play that visual out, and I'll take my question to Dr. Lauren Selin and Dr. Patrick Cronin. I want to show you those visuals. They're operating it. They're flying your Black Hawks. The largest fleet of Black Hawks outside of America. Look at that picture. I hope you see the television sets. That's a Black Hawk landing in the governor's house in Kandahar. It came in via Afghan news agency called Aswaka. That's the first Black Hawk officially that has been spotted being operated by the Taliban. And just think about this. Think about it for a second and let it sink in. You have the Pakistan warning of another 9/11, and then you have this visual of Black Hawks in the hands of the Taliban. And I want to show you that video that really gave us a nightmare in our newsrooms of all the choppers. Let me tell you how many choppers we saw. We spotted at least 20 choppers. 20 choppers, transport cargo planes, light attack aeroplanes. I have another visual. I want to play that. That also came in today. In Taliban hands of choppers, you have 110 choppers, including Mi-17, MD-530s, and Black Hawks that were given to the Afghan forces today. And I want to play that visual out. I'm just waiting for that picture to come in. We had that video of choppers that are in the hands of Taliban today. I'm going to play that picture, and yeah, look at that video. Look at that video. That's a video that came in. That's a video that came in. Those are all your transport cargo aeroplanes, light attack aeroplanes, 60 transport and cargo aeroplanes, C-208, C-182, C-130, T-182, G-222, AN-32s, A-29s, your light attack aeroplanes, intelligence recon planes, and you have Pakistan warning of another 9/11. It's such a crazy situation to be in. Dr. Lauren Selin, I don't know what you think about this. You've served in Afghanistan What do you think about this, Dr. Lawrence Sellin? And I'll have Dr. Patrick Cronin respond to you.
Well, I'm not so much concerned about, helicopters and aircraft. They need to be maintained. If there are sanctions against the Taliban government, they won't be maintained and they'll be essentially useless. I see two problems going forward. The first problem has to do with the terrorism issue. We have to look at the Taliban and groups like the Islamic State and Khorasan as co-belligerents. They basically have the same strategy, but they may use other tactics. And it's a strategy we need to be concerned about when they work together against a particular enemy. For example, just 2 weeks ago, the head of Jaish-e-Mohammed, Masoud Azhar, went to Kandahar and met with the Taliban leadership. His objective was to coordinate with the Taliban for attacks on India. Now, this is the kind of destabilization that everyone should be concerned about. The second issue is how China and Pakistan will fill the vacuum that the United States and NATO left when it left Afghanistan. China in particular, but with Pakistan, wants to control South Asia economically and militarily. And so we need to take steps, and I think the United States and India should work very closely together on this to prevent China and Pakistan from benefiting from this withdrawal.
Yeah. Dr. Patrick, you want to respond to what Dr. Lawrence Sellin has said. Now, he served a considerable amount of time in Afghanistan.
I would do would be to underscore his last comment, which is that this is an opportunity now and a necessity for the United States and India to redouble their cooperation and to think differently about how we're going to both counter terrorism going forward, but also dealing with the power vacuum, dealing with the encroachment of China and other countries, including Russia, perhaps, not just Pakistan. But all of this is, in turmoil right now. And so, you're showing images and you're asking for sort of responses to the tactical bungling of the evacuation operation, which is one issue and a serious issue. And there's a great tragedy that we'll see unfolding in images, not just today, but in days to come. But the strategy of the Biden administration is very much following where the U.S. government has been going over the last decade or more. When you think about the Obama administration and the Trump administration, and finally, Joe Biden, they were all elected to a large extent to try to wind down the two big counterinsurgencies that ensued after 9/11, because the U.S. approach was ultimately unsustainable in terms of trying to fight a global war on terror, an undefined threat, through counterinsurgency was not something that we were going to be able to sustain. So we needed to focus on trying to have a counterterrorism strategy that was working in tandem with allies and partners, that was focused not on nation building and counterinsurgency, but on raiding and degrading the terror organizations and going after the sanctuaries, which we didn't do. As you mentioned, John Bolton said that we didn't go after Pakistan. Well, he was the national security advisor. Where were they going after Pakistan when he was national security advisor? The problem is it's a real challenge because Pakistan is a big country and has a lot of influence, and we have overlapping interests with Pakistan, even while we have conflicting interests. But make no mistake, the U.S.-India relationship is going to grow going forward, even further now, and that's a good thing. And we're not going to be able to bring complete order to a place like Afghanistan. We couldn't do it on the ground after 20 years and $2 trillion. We're not going to be doing it from afar either. But we can cooperate with other like-minded countries and democracies like India to try to stabilize and bring order and go after specific terror threats as they start to arise. That's going to be difficult, but it's still a more sustainable counterterrorism strategy than the one we've had in the last 20 years.
The scary situation also is, and we've been tracking reports, and I saw Colonel Rohidev raise his hand there. I'll come to you, Colonel Rohidev. I think Ravi Batra is also joining us, eminent attorney and chair, National Advisory Council for South Asia Affairs, joining us live from New York. He's on the move, and let me get in a question from him. Ravi, getting in reports now that hundreds more of Americans are still stranded. They're not even being able to get to the airport in Kabul. We have reports, and we have our reporters on the ground. They talk about how at least over 100, minimum 100 or more, outside the Kabul airport. Some tried reaching the airport yesterday in buses, were stopped by the Taliban. It's a pretty scary situation, and one that's making America so weak, looking so weak. America's looking so weak this evening, Ravi. They could have avoided this.
Of course. Hi, Niranjan. I first of all join plenty of comments already made by your co-panelists. You know, what has happened in Afghanistan is really an embarrassment and a case study of how not to do any policy goal effectuation. You know, one can, you know, I was never in favor of leaving Afghanistan, but that's a policy decision and reasonable minds can differ. I think we should have stayed pure to our counterterrorism original mission, never gotten involved with nation building. It is as difficult as change, and one ought not to do it. But having done it, we could have simply downgraded to our original counterterrorism mission and stayed for 100 years. But that's, again, a policy decision. After the Doha 2020 deal that was done under the Trump administration, the United States decided to become Santa Claus with the belief that the Taliban, you know, it's one thing to be an insurgent. It's quite another to become government. When you're a government, you have to deal with sanitation, food delivery, you know, public safety, police force. So you have to become reasonable. Every government has to be reasonable, whereas an insurgent doesn't have to be. So on that belief, the Trump administration took a leap of faith that the Taliban would become like any other properly functioning country within the bell-shaped curve. The Biden administration, who, you know, rejected many Trump deals like the Paris Agreement that was rejected by Trump, you know, under the Biden administration, we rejoined it. And of course, we have one president at a time. You know, that's a principle we live with. But the Biden administration adopted the Trump exit, which they didn't have to, but it was done. And that's a policy decision, and that's fine. You know, Joe Biden gets paid the big bucks to be the president of the United States, and it's his call. However, once a leader makes that decision, it is up to the administrative subordinates to carry it out properly. This is where the fiasco has occurred. Leaving aside the Santa Claus gifting of 80 or $120 billion worth of military equipment that will destabilize the region for the next 25 years, because there's a balance of power that has now shifted in the wrong hands, frankly. But to effectuate the evacuation the way we've done it, it's a case study of exactly what not to do. It's the Dumb and Dumber routine. You know, we gave away Bagram Air Base when that's the last thing we should have left behind if we were going to leave it behind. To close it up first and then try to evacuate out of, you know, Karzai Airport, it's an embarrassment. We've lost 13 young men and women of our service members, which is really a stain. It's a stain on our national honor, frankly. And but that's not a Biden mistake. That's the people serving Biden. So heads are going to have to roll. Congress will have to hold hearings as to how could this happen. How could we may have the strongest military, but if you don't know how to play the game, and if you don't know how to walk and chew gum at the same time, maybe you shouldn't be leading the finest military in the world. So my biggest worry, frankly, Niranjan, is that I think we're going to have to give, and I mean by that word give, I think we're going to have to be Santa Claus to India and just to reassess and restore to India its balance of power. Because whatever we've given away to the Taliban as a gift, it's an absolute mistake. It's a disaster. Afghanistan has more Black Hawks than Australia does. It's hard to comprehend. You know, so I'm simply taking the liberty of having this open discussion on foreign TV, which I never do against the United States, because, you know, this particular egg has cracked in global limelight. So there's no point in not admitting that it has taken place. But we now look towards India as Prime Minister Modi in 2016 said in his Washington Declaration that India is indivisible from the United States. So we really now need India to help restore the balance of power, despite our gifting away, almost $100 billion worth of military equipment. So India has become much, much more important. But India then, needs to be not just in the Quad, but also take more of a role than it has been taking with Afghanistan and in the region, because there are lots of other secular Muslim majority countries who will be destabilized because of what has occurred here in Afghanistan.
No, very candid, a view of what you feel about the entire handling, and I saw you mention, whether Biden would have handled it. I mean, whether Trump would have handled the issue better, the withdrawal better. Okay, let me go across to, because you also spoke about a larger role for India. Let me get in Smita Prakash on that one. Smita, one thing about India, we don't believe in good Taliban or bad Taliban, or good terror, bad terror. It's just the same for us. Now, how do you see India respond to a situation like this?
Look, there's been a lot of talk, even in the domestic media, about whether we should acknowledge, whether we should talk to the Taliban, what should our strategy be, India's strategy be. Maybe back channel we need to, because we have people out there, we have strategic interests there too. So that is a grey area that is possible. But we don't have to recognize, we didn't do that earlier, we don't need to do that now. As far as, one of your commentators said that he's not really that concerned about the Black Hawks out there because they need servicing. Maybe an American, maybe a European is not all that concerned. But we in India, we are terrified when we see all these assets, all these military assets lying in the hands of the Taliban now. Maybe 10%, 15% need servicing. But even that, imagine if the Taliban, the Haqqani network of the Taliban get their hands on this. Pakistan will service it for them. China will provide their expertise. I think people forget that the Taliban are just a loosely held group. There's the Salafi Taliban, there's the Haqqani Taliban, there's the Hikmatyar, Hizb Islami Taliban. There are so many of them, and many are backed by Pakistan. So we in India are not in a happy position right now, because all said and done, I mean, like in the domestic media, there was this talk that Stanikzai has said that they want good relations with India and Pakistan. But what does that even mean? I mean, you have this deadly cocktail of ISIS-K, Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISS foot soldiers out there. So who is one to believe? Who knows who's in charge in Kabul right now, or Kandahar, or any part of Afghanistan for that matter. So I think the approach that India has taken, which is wait and watch, it's the only pragmatic solution right now for India.
Yeah. And I want to bring in Ray. Ray, there's this quote of President George Bush back then. He said, and I quote, he said, a post-Taliban, and read the words carefully, right? Listen. He said, a post-Taliban rebirth of democracy and civil society is underway in Afghanistan. The United States has supported the new democracy by registering over 10 million Afghans. And the reason I'm quoting him to you, 24 hours before US pulls out completely, is the disaster that we're staring at. We just heard one Taliban spokesman or a so-called minister say that girls can no more sit in classrooms with boys in school, and that's just one of the defining news that's coming out of Kabul this evening, right? It's such a fall.
Well, yeah, obviously. I mean, it's a terrible thing to watch. I think President Bush was hoping for the best when we came in there. We got rid of the Taliban after the 9/11 attacks because they had harbored the terrorist organization that had killed 3,000 Americans. We had very little alternative. And once we broke the Taliban government of Afghanistan, we had to do something. We couldn't leave a vacuum, so they tried their best. Unfortunately, successive administrations have been operating under delusion for 20 years that somehow Afghanistan could be converted into a thriving liberal democracy, along the lines of India. That hasn't happened, and we've all known it. Anybody who's read the reports coming out of that country for the last 20 years knows that really Afghanistan has been unsustainable. And so now we're reaping the whirlwind on that, and we're seeing what happens when you talk yourself into believing something that really isn't true.
Yeah, and Colonel Rohit wants to come in. Colonel Rohit, you think the US was naive? Were they misled on this entire so-called Doha agreement? I mean, see what's happened, dude. I mean, Taliban is literally, mocking America in front of the world.
No, Niranjan, let's not be so cynical about the US, and I would urge my guests on the panel to be a little more cheerful of the future. You can't be so heart-beaten and brow-beaten like you're showing currently. From effect-based operations, today, US is staring at a compromise-based operation, and that is something you need to think about. You need to think about internally. This haste of a pullout and the operational faux which has happened is contingent to one underlying factor, if the US can understand, is because of your innate desire to get the domestic token high as the President of the United States by pulling out people. Right? It was a dream given to the Americans that they will pull out. Good dream. But in the giving that good dream, you see what happened in your pre-run to the election, Black Lives Matter, COVID pandemic, all that happened. And who controls? Who has pumped in the billions there? The Chinese. And you have not sat on this and not seen through the economic might how the Chinese are trying to overpay internally at the edifices of what you stand for as Americans. So it is something to ponder. The second part is, it is a lesson for the United States and the world and the UNSC to take home that when you have these unilateral pullouts of NATO and allied forces, and when you think that you have achieved some kind of a levinsram in that area, you need to have the UN mandate to have a governance structure being created slowly. It should be a lesson in the future, not too late. Boris Johnson and Macron have gone to town to the UN this morning and talked about humanitarian access into Afghanistan. Use that as a conduit to start UN-backed operations, to see a correct governance structure coming there. And if there is a threat, you have to deal with it military under Chapter 7. Then so be it, and that is where you can get countries like India too. And I'm afraid what you started about by saying about this, the space and everything else, all this equipment will be reverse engineered in the Chinese defense market. They will be recreated. You have put India under a tremendous pressure because India will think twice before now importing the same assets from you. They are compromised. So you have to understand the larger picture. And what it does in US, it starts another arms race internally in US to create weapons at higher cost and at the cost of your development and infra and your people, to make sure that this compromised equipment, you create something better in the future. How much time will you take in your R&D? So all this, if you see, even at the operational level, there is much more to be done in the US. And I think you need to sit back, be smiling about it. Don't be so morose because nothing, no heavens have not fallen because all this happens as mistake. But if you treat it as mistake, I'm quite sure you'll find the right answers. And it's not far away. UNSC is your backyard. Why don't you start with the humanitarian issue there, talk about girls' education, talk about terror attacks, and revive this entire thing to the UN to give it some structure. I'm quite sure it's not.
Colonel Rohit, I have about 5 minutes. I'll just try and get 3 more of our panelists. I saw Anders raise his hand there. Anders, you wanted to come in? You want to respond to Colonel Rohit?
Well, I definitely agree that we should be more optimistic and forward-leaning on this. We can't just give up. And in addition to the economic sanctions on Pakistan and China for this, I think when we think about military operations in Afghanistan in the future, they ought to be either the Quad or NATO. We can't, when you bring in the UN, you're bringing in China and Russia, and those are the wrong actors to bring anywhere.
Yeah.
If I might, Niranjan.
Go ahead, Ravi.
It's not about optimism or a cynicism. It's about realism. The reality is that we have scrambled our eggs. and we are not going to end up making an omelet out of this, okay? We have scrambled eggs. You know, Humpty Dumpty did fall off the wall, and we have a problem, and there's a balance of power problem because we've gifted, and I, by the way, agree that there will be reverse engineering not only by China, but even by Russia. You know, the Chinese Navy is based upon the carrier they got from Ukraine, you know, for $14 million for scrap metal cost. And now they have a Navy and a carrier fleet that they're building, which is reverse engineered up to 21st century, you know, credentials. So we have a problem, and we absolutely need to not only get, our first job is to get our people out safely without any more casualties. That's job number one. Second, to get out all the Afghans that we need to get out, that we promised to get out, we need to get them out, okay? Third job, after we've cleaned up this mess, as if you drop something in the kitchen, clean up the floor. After we've done that, then we got to go back and deal with reestablishing and replenishing the balance of power that India, whatever India had, for example, with the regional players, okay? And that's our biggest job. That's our biggest job.
Ravi, I have about 2 minutes. Let me get in Patrick. Patrick, Dr. Patrick Cronin, Ravi spoke about sanctions on Pakistan, and I have 2 minutes, so I want to focus on this, right? Let alone sanctions on Pakistan, there is talk of a few US forces landing in Islamabad last night. We're still waiting in for more details to come in. We don't know if it was just a stopover. Will US play a larger role with Pakistan? Will Biden use Imran Khan's help? Will he fall for that trap again? Or do you think it's time that America sees through Pakistan's true colors this time around?
Well, in the policy world, you often don't have that choice. So sometimes you have to deal diplomatically with actors you disagree with and you're at odds with. That doesn't mean you believe them. That doesn't mean you accept what they're doing. But you do try to minimize the actions you have to take. So there's going to be some tactical dealing with Pakistan, but the trust level with Pakistan is extremely low right now. India is the country that we are going to have to build up the cooperation with here, as most of the speakers have already said. And we're going to have to be realistic, though, about what we can achieve from afar and how much pressure and leverage we have against Pakistan. I listened to the Pakistani ambassador to America today on radio, and I can't believe what he was allowed to say in terms of divorced from reality. Pakistan is not to blame at all, apparently, with the Taliban or any problems. And this is all America's fault about Afghanistan, not the withdrawal and how it's been handled, but the entire sort of terror bastion that has been created for decades.
Yeah. And I'm going to end with Dr. Lawrence Sellin. Dr. Sellin, you've served there. Last 10 seconds, I'm going to let you take that. Do you think Americans can get Americans out of Afghanistan? There are, I don't know how many number of Americans remain in Kabul and other parts of Afghanistan. Do you think that you can get them out safely?
I don't think the Biden administration wants to get them out. Let me tell you something I just learned in the last 18 hours. 4 American citizens, a mother who was born in Afghanistan and 3 of her children born in Texas, were taken to the Kabul airport by the Taliban. And the commander on the ground, the American commander, Major General Chris Donahue, would not let them into the airport. And apparently it was done on the order of Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley. So my conclusion is that Americans will be stranded in Afghanistan, and the Biden administration doesn't seem to care about it.
Well, it's a grim...
That can't be true.
Okay.
That the Biden administration doesn't care about our own people. I don't agree with that.
Ravi, we'll talk again. We'll talk again tomorrow. Running out of time. Smita, Colonel Rohit Dev, Dr. Lawrence Sellin, Dr. Patrick Cronin, Ray Locker, Anders Scott, and Ravi Batra. Thank you for joining us on the show this evening. Next 24 hours are critical. Stay tuned. And we have a big India-Pakistan debate coming up. Pakistan has said that another 9/11 is possible if the West does not engage the Taliban. Can you believe it that NSA has gone on record to warn of another 9/11? Stay tuned. Dipti is coming up with that debate at 10 p.m.